Good afternoon, everybody. As Joel mentioned, my name is Atal Bande, and thank you, Joel, for your remarks. So I'm pleased to be joined this afternoon by some amazing gentlemen this afternoon. We've got here Max Bissell, the Vice President of General Manager, Hard Services and Robotics at Bissell Home Care, Inc. We've also got Rabia Jamal, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Wasabic Development Company. And last but not least, Raj Kothari, Managing Director and Co-Founder, Cascade Partners, LLC. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us this afternoon. You guys feel free to give them a hand. So as we start, West Michigan, at West Michigan, we've been fortunate to enjoy a legacy of a strong business community and entrepreneurial drive. And a lot of that comes from the strong businesses that we have in Grand Rapids. And part of that strength is due to the large number of locally owned and family-owned businesses in the community. And as Joel mentioned, the goal that we have is how do we continue the momentum into the next generation? How do we continue to cultivate that? And there's two things that we know. Number one, we are facing a market where there's a lot of money on balance sheets. And number two, the boomer business leaders are nearing the great retirement. And so as we look at that, we want to have a conversation today about what are the options for business leadership transition, and what does that mean for our community? And so we want to start with you, Max. As we said earlier, there's a lot of family-owned businesses in Grand Rapids. And given that this community is home to businesses like Amway, Gordon Foods, Hayworth, Urban Seating, Lax Enterprises, Meyer Steelcase, and of course, Bissell, it may not surprise a lot of you to hear that 57% of, that family businesses contribute to 57% of the economy. And a lot of business scholars are exploring the uniqueness and the benefit that family businesses bring to a community. And now with that, can you share what this means to you as well as the community?
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here and great to be a panelist. So I've worked for Bissell now for 10 years in sort of an official capacity, but growing up, I always spent a lot of time at the company and sort of moving around with my dad and some of the leadership team. I've lived overseas for 5 of my 10 years, and when I tell people that I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan, you kind of get a lot of blank stares. No one really knows where that is, but then you mentioned some of the companies that are here, like Amway, who has a very big footprint in China. Wolverine Worldwide, the Sperry shoes that you're wearing are from Wolverine. So then you start to make connections, and people really realize that although Grand Rapids might be a small town, there's a ton of really big businesses here, and I think that's something that really makes Grand Rapids unique and is a differentiator. Growing up in Grand Rapids, I think I've really appreciated the fact that there are so many big businesses here, and that the leadership of those companies have been focused on building the community. And the similarity or the parallel that I draw is with the Walton family and the work they've done in Bentonville. So I don't know if anyone's been down to Bentonville, but it was a very small town. Walmart started there, expanded, and I think my guess is the family realized that in order to be successful in the future, they needed to build a town where people wanted to live, so they could hire and retain the best talent. And I think the leadership from Amway and Myers and the families and others have really invested in Grand Rapids, and I think that's a big differentiator. So the medical mile here downtown, I think, is a great story of the DeVosses and the Myers investing in buildings, which brought in great doctors, which brought in universities and research and then students. And now if you drive around downtown, it's kind of a vibrant little metropolis. So for me, I think that's really something that makes Grand Rapids unique, and I think the next generation, with this retirement of some of the legacy leaders within the community, we've got to think through, what is next for Grand Rapids, and how do we have a similar vision and really implement that vision as well as the other leaders have.
Awesome. Thank you. And Raj, you have over 3 decades of experience as an entrepreneur, financial advisor, and investor. And in that time, you've led various strategic transactions, divestitures, recapitalizations, acquisitions. So you know better than most the kind of money that's on balance sheets. Now, tell me, is a great retirement real? And should we be concerned about local companies being bought or acquired at a higher rate?
Well, I think if you look around in your neighbors and your friends, the great retirement is real. The great resignation that's happened to many employees, we're continuing to see accelerate with shareholders. And when you have a lot of capital out there, you've got strong valuations, and an environment where people are like, well, gosh, I survived the recession in 2008, 2009, and now we had COVID, tap out, I'm out. And so we're seeing it. You're seeing a lot of activity where shareholders are looking at, hey, what are their options? And the interesting thing is there are far more options in the marketplace today than there were 10 or 15 years ago, whether it's, hey, do I find a minority partner? Do I look at an ESOP? Do I look at some other creative structures to transition the business and our legacy? Or do I just take some chips off the table and continue to be an owner and a partner as the business grows? We're in an environment where maybe 15 years ago, the majority of transactions were privately held, family-held businesses. And in this day and age, it's private equity owned to private equity owned at an increasing rate because of the permutation of that capital structure and the amount of capital out there. So, average baby boomer is, they're 58 to 76 years old, and the average retirement age is 62. So the demographics say, hey, we're going to transition. But I think you're going to see is a shift in entrepreneurialism. The cost of setting up a business, the cost of getting into business, the rate of change that's creating tremendous opportunity doesn't mean entrepreneurialism is going to go away. I think there's actually more opportunities for entrepreneurialism, and it's actually easier to be an entrepreneur because that initial upfront capital investment, I don't have to buy a $20,000 phone system, and I don't have to have an office, and I got my cell phone and I've got my iPad. I'm up on business. And so I think as we look forward, the nature of the businesses and what they look like and how they're successful is different than what we've seen in the past. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Thank you. Rabia, so your experience is in transitions, exits, turnarounds. If someone in the room or someone that they know is thinking about exiting, what are some things they should be considering?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the question, Ata. So I'll speak to maybe just a simple concept to start with, which is for a lot of people, when they're thinking about their business and a transition, they often think about the transition as a transaction, which, as Raj here spoke about, there's a number of ways a transaction could look in this day and age. You can structure a deal in a lot of different ways. But the transition is a lot different. The transition is about what do you want your business to look like after that event. And for a lot of people, it's different things, and you have to figure out for yourself, for each business owner, what is the right thing to do for my business, for my community, for my employees. And so that could be selling to a third party, which the last couple of years has been absolutely a seller's market. There's unprecedented capital out there, so if you want to maximize the return on a sale, this has been the market to do it, and I think it continues to be that way. But there are other options. There are folks that getting the highest dollar isn't necessarily just the most important thing. There are other things. So that could look like an ESOP selling to employees. It could look like a transition to management, and it could also be a transition to the next generation. But the common denominator across all those different transitions is that in order to maximize value pre and post the event, the transaction, there are certain systems and processes, certain considerations you have to take into account. And I think from my perspective, having seen businesses that have gone through a transition do it poorly and end up in a turnaround situation, I also now have the benefit of from an acquirer perspective, the tribe in Wasayabec, we are an acquirer of businesses and we hold them for the long term. There are very specific things that differentiate a business that becomes very attractive in that way and can succeed and survive for multiple generations, and those that don't. And in some cases, after the event, end up being a turnaround. And so the two things I want to focus on is this is an opportunity to look kind of introspectively at your business and decide, how do I prepare the business for that transition, and do I have the right structures and leadership in place? So from a generational perspective, and this is really important for family businesses, is the next set of leaders ready? Are they ready in the sense that they have the skill sets, the attributes to lead the next phase of this organization? And then do they have the right team around them? Because the owner-operator that ran that business for 30 plus years had a different business to run than the one this next generation is stepping into. And so making sure the right team is in place and the right leadership is in place. The next thing is systems and processes. And for a lot of businesses, especially the $50 million revenue on down, systems and processes are often confused with things like ERP systems and software. But what is often kind of the key thing, and Steve mentioned this earlier in his presentation, there's a talent and experience and knowledge that is also retiring and exiting. And so that machine operator that knows exactly how to run the machine to keep the product coming out at high quality, low scrap rate, et cetera, if that person retires, the next person coming in doesn't know those nuances and intricacies that make this business tick. And so how do you transition that knowledge so that it sustains the change and the transition? And then the last thing I would say is, especially for family businesses out there, most family businesses, when they hit the event time, they are low leverage. Their balance sheet doesn't have a lot of debt on it, often no debt. And they go through the event and they have to take on debt to lever up the business. The next generation coming in to run the business is running now an entirely different business with different considerations that they have to take into account, different stresses. So look at this as an opportunity to prepare your business to make sure that you are positioning the business to succeed with and without that event. You'll be better off for it. If you do those things, you will likely end up getting the highest value during the transaction and minimizing risk for yourself, but also for buyers like us that want to come in and buy businesses that will survive and sustain, in our case, for 7 generations. And so keep that in mind when you're looking at it. It'll make it a big difference for you, for your organization, for your team members, and for Grand Rapids and the community.
Thank you. I love that. Making sure, having the right team and then systems and processes and how important that is just for any business, right? And Max, I think that's a great segue to you. I mean, Bissell is unique, right? So I was surprised to hear 5th generation in the family. I mean, a lot of family-owned businesses don't get past 2, right? So that's I'm sure you guys have a good sense of systems and processes. So I've got a question that's a 2-parter for you. What is the strength of family-owned business, and then what does it take to keep it going?
So the first question, what are the strengths? I think my belief is it's really the ability to play the long game. So to look to the future and make investments in the business that we think are appropriate to make sure that we continue to be successful going forward. So we've got to continue to deliver results every month, every quarter, every year, but we have the ability to say, you know what, this is going to be an important investment for the future, and it's one that we're willing to make. And then, having the family alignment there, I think, is the other part of the question. To keep the business going, there's got to be a really close-knit group among the shareholders. Everyone's got to understand the vision. Everyone has to believe in the vision. And as a family, we've spent a lot of time establishing family meetings and making sure that the shareholders that are not involved with the business really understand it enough to feel like they've got a seat at the table and weigh in on things that they think are important. And I think that's been a large part of our success over the last several years. Looking back into history, I think we're fortunate that we've had a family that's done a really good job setting core values and holding the organization and themselves accountable to that. There are a number of principles that my grandfather put in place for family members that want to work at the business, just to make sure that Bissell doesn't become an organization where just because you're a Bissell, you have the ability to work there. So sort of this mindset around a performance culture, I think those kinds of things not only make sure that, if you're a family member working at the company, you've earned it, but I think also for the other employees makes them know that, this is a business that they can move to, that they can grow within, and just because you're a family member doesn't mean that you'll be CEO, as an example.
Great. So just because you're a Bissell doesn't mean you get to work in there. I love hearing playing the long game, some alignment within the family, and then having a clear vision. Awesome. Raj, you mentioned earlier ESOPs. So a question for you around that. So employee stock ownership plans. Do you see ESOPs as an option for family businesses that they can take when succession is not one?
Yeah, I think you see ESOPs being used across a variety of businesses, not just family-owned businesses. Rabia started talking about it. It's really about understanding what your real objectives are. What do you really want, and what's the tools to help you get there? Many times organizations, shareholders come to us and like, well, we want to sell our business. And it's like, well, let's unpack that a little bit. What are you really trying to accomplish, right? Are you trying to create liquidity? Liquidity doesn't mean you have to exit. There are strategies. Oh, well, we don't have succession. We don't have anybody in the company. Okay, well, is that why we're selling? Because if you're leaving the day after, buyers are like, well, what do you know that we don't know? Because you're bugging out, right? So if you're like, hey, I'm ready to retire, your time to start thinking about that transition is 3 to 4 years before that. So ESOPs are a great tool. There's some great tax advantages. It's a great way to engage your employees, but as Rabia said, you have had to build your organization to succeed. If you're going to look at an ESOP because you're ready to transition out, who's going to lead the ESOP, right? I mean, who's going to lead the organization? Whether you transition ownership, you still have a management issue to manage through. So really understanding the objectives so I can look at, hey, is an ESOP going to give the team what I want? Are there other? There's a tremendous variety of programs out now to create equity incentives for the team. We heard from Gentex talking about their option program. KKR just did a very huge exit, and from the very beginning of their investment, they had ownership going down through the organization. On their exit, $360 million went to employees. That's wealth creation. Right, that's going to change a community. So what do you want? What are you really trying to accomplish is going to dictate, is it an ESOP? Is it a minority sale? Is it a recap? Do I go to a family office, a tribe? What do I really want to accomplish? What do we want the legacy to look like? And the best part is there are way more opportunities to explore that today. And that's the fun part of the work that we get to do is, here's the menu.
That's great to hear. So there's a menu of things that folks can choose from, but it starts with understanding the objective is what I'm hearing, and then also that 3 to 4 year lead time. So not just saying, hey, next year we're trying to do something. What are my options?
To build those things that Rabia was talking about takes time. Yep. And if you do it right, you're building your organization to succeed. Event, no event, right? We talk to entrepreneurs all the time. It's like build your organization as if you're never going to sell it. Because if you do that, you're going to make smart, good business decisions that's going to make your business attractive by definition. So that's where you got to focus. Don't worry about the transaction. Don't do things for a transaction. People will see through that. Savvy buyers like Rabia, his team, they see through that because you see you're doing it for the first time, maybe the second time. Buyers have done it hundreds of times looking at organizations.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of the things I love seeing on your website is it's about transformation, not the transaction. So thanks for sharing that. This next question I'll pose to you, Rabia, but anyone else that wants to jump in on it because this is a topic that we're hearing a lot about today. Entering this into a period of inflation, right? So something that very few, if any, leaders have had to manage through. And so as we enter into this time, what are you seeing, and what advice would you give to leaders going into this?
That's when we obviously prepare for some of these events of this panel. But when I was thinking about how to answer that question, I was thinking this is the amount of things you can dive into to answer that question is there's just so many topics that would each take their own panel discussion and would be worthy of that. So maybe I thought I'd start with by kind of summarizing what we're seeing in our portfolio, and I think it's very similar to what I'm hearing from other colleagues and folks in the community, not just in West Michigan, and certainly West Michigan is experiencing a certain healthy amount of challenges, but it's not any different than what we're seeing around the country. And so for us, when we look at our portfolio and we look at inflation in general, it starts by understanding, we look at the businesses that we have, and there's more demand than we've ever seen, to the point where, on paper, our spreadsheets look amazing. I mean, we could scale the business 20, 30, 40% because the demand is there. We're getting plenty of revenue opportunities. We're getting, we have customers that are willing to give us firm commitments for a year, 2 years out, if and only if we can ultimately deliver on what they're asking of us. And so why are we not hitting those numbers? For the same reasons that I think a lot of other folks in the organization, in the community, are facing, which is this labor shortage and the talent shortage. And it's creating a situation where you have the work, you can execute it, but you can't find the people to do it, and everyone's competing for that same talent. Then you add to that supply chain issues. We have an organization in our portfolio that historically, certain critical parts that it would take to make a product used to take 8 weeks to show up. Now they have a 52-week lead time. Well, imagine how long it would take to plan, execute, and then ultimately deliver that product for reasons entirely outside of the control of leadership. And then you add other inflationary pressures, right? The gas and the freight charges, transportation charges. Everyone's experiencing those, whether it's things coming from overseas or even just kind of local freight and transportation costs across the nation. And then, of course, the Fed jumps in because the Fed wants to counter that, but really, while doing it, they're also sort of compounding the problem in that we're going to have increased rates all the way through the rest of this year, increasing the cost of debt and ultimately making things even, more challenging. So you look at all these set of circumstances and you're like, okay, well, this is a tough environment for businesses to operate in, and the opportunity is there. And I think what makes it exciting is, for us, at least what we tell our portfolio leaders, is that we want to focus on a couple of things, and we heard about them a lot today. And I don't want to repeat what's been said before, but it's important. One is you got to take care of the folks that you have, kind of focus on the value systems and making sure people know that they're working for an organization that takes care of them. So you can't have your talent go elsewhere because someone else has a better program and is taking care of them. But they're that team, the group of folks you have it's the easiest thing to do if you can just keep who you have by treating them well and doing what you need to do. And the next thing is give them a sense of purpose, and we hear about that a lot, is what are you trying to achieve with your business and your objective? And so for us as a tribe, especially given kind of historical context of what Native Americans have gone through, we are our purpose is very clear. We're here to sustain, diversify, and grow the economy of our tribe for generations, and our team understands the meaningful aspect of what it is we're trying to do. So making sure everyone understands what that is, but then where the kind of the rubber hits the road is for the leaders, how are they differentiating themselves? And I think this is the exciting part for me, is I'm going to look at a portfolio that we have, and we're going to have leaders that are running entirely different companies in different products, services, industries. The ones that are really going to make the difference for us are the leaders that are thinking in a way that is different than everyone else and doing the difficult things to navigate these challenges. And I thought, again, Steve did I thought it was a really powerful presentation, because to me that was a perfect example of a leader of an organization that is saying, look, I'm facing these challenges, so is everyone else. How am I going to approach it differently, and how am I going to come out of this, one, capitalizing on the opportunities that exist, but also solving for problems that not only are going to be here today, but will likely be here for the next 5 to 10 years. Solving for them now, doing the right things, the difficult things now, will make it so that those organizations, in our case, those portfolio companies, will be the ones that will be standout performers later down the road because they did what they needed to now. And that's what leaders have to really think about, embrace, and challenge themselves if they're going to differentiate themselves for the future.
So if I could maybe add a little bit of, for CEOs and executives, to grab onto the 80s movie themes, carpe diem, right? Sure, it's tough. Welcome to business world, right? I mean, I don't know, I've been an entrepreneur for almost 30 years. I have a lot of gray hair because of that. But this is the opportunity how do I seize this? How do I seize this moment? How do I prepare my team? Because if we go through this lull, right, if we go through a pullback, someone's not going to do as well. So how am I preparing my organization to capture that and take advantage of it? That's the guidance that I'm working with in the organizations that I'm engaged with. Say, are you preparing? Is your strategic plan creating opportunities and contingencies that if they present themselves, you can take advantage of it? The most success, I'll use acquisitions as one example. It's not the only example, but you look at the most successful acquisitions in the last 20 years were done in 2008 and 2009. Look at how many organizations, their growth exploded during COVID because they took an opportunity in the market and exploited it and either created a business from nothing or took advantage of the dynamics that were going on in the market by being nimble, by being creative, by taking risk. Right? As entrepreneurs, that's what we do every day, right? We take risk. So use this as an opportunity to say, hey, I know it's coming. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like. Have a big deck of saying, well, here are the options I can go pull if one of them makes sense. And I think that's where we can really propel organizations as we look out. You know, it's easy to pull back in and say, I'm going to hunker down, right? It's really risk. It's really entrepreneurs stepping out and saying, how am I going to lead forward into this very, very, very scary time? And I think you'll create some amazing opportunities for yourself.
Awesome. So I'm hearing a couple of things here. For number one, as you said, Robia, take care of your talent, right? Because you don't want them going somewhere else where they can get it. There's a better program. Like Steve, think inside the box, right? So how are we being innovative and doing things differently? And then from you, Raj, like how do we see problems as opportunities? I had an entrepreneur that told me once that when she faced a problem, as opposed to looking at it as a problem, she was like, as an entrepreneur, I'm a problem solver. So I have the same ability to solve this problem as I did solving the initial problem that brought my business into existence. So how do we see this problem that we're going into as an opportunity to innovate or whatever the case may be? Because we're running short on time, I'll ask a two-part question. I'll ask two questions. You can pick which one you want to answer, and for any one of you, right? So one, either what keeps you up at night about the economy, or what are you most excited about?
So I think I just covered that. I mean, I am. I'm honestly excited about the opportunity that this market presents. We went through 12 years of really moderate growth, right? There's a real opportunity in COVID, and we looked at it and said, ooh, how do we win? And then the opportunity was gone because it went like really fast. I think we're going to go through the same cycle where there's so much money. Rabia said, demand's driving this economy. The challenge we're having are supply-based, which is usually the other way around. And so I'm excited. I'm not, I'm keeping an eye out what's happening, trying to position, but I think the entrepreneurialism, the resourcefulness, and the changes in the market dynamic, we've got real potential to do some amazing things as we look forward in the next 5 to 10 years in this market, but across the Midwest.
Anything either of you want to add?
I'm not quite as optimistic about the next couple of years. I think they're going to be tough from an economic standpoint, and the reason I say that is just as we look at inflation, I think the consumer in general is getting squeezed, and although there's been a lot of money pumped into the system over the last several years, I think now there's savings are down. I think to levels they were sort of pre-pandemic, and I think we're going to hit a period of time where consumers going to have to make choices around is this essential or is this not?
I'll jump in here as well and just say, I mean, if, anyone who's been in leadership or business ownership, you're up at night for a variety of reasons often. And all those things that we talk about, for me, they keep me up at night. We have a big portfolio in different asset classes, from real estate to government to manufacturing, services, et cetera. And they all have different dynamics, and I spend a lot of time thinking about all those things we just mentioned: supply chain issues, talent issues, cost of debt, freight, all of it. But for me, what makes it really exciting is because I got to kind of cut my teeth during the 08-09. That's when I really kind of started and got to learn a lot about kind of turnaround and businesses that didn't survive for a number of reasons, for choices, decisions that were made, some rightly, some wrongly, some of it within people's control and some of it that's not. But what makes it interesting is how we're going to respond to it. And for me, that is an exciting time. I agree with you. I think the next couple of years are in fact going to be challenging, and our businesses are trying to prepare for how to deal with that. But what makes it interesting is what are we going to do and how are we going to embrace that? And do we have a team that's ready to jump up and say, hey, we're going to take on more, not to retrench, not to slow down, but to take advantage of this time and do something different with it. And so the sleepless nights will continue. I think that's just the nature of being an entrepreneur, being in business, being in leadership, is we're responsible for people, and it's a big responsibility. But it creates an opportunity to do something with it, and I think that's what makes it exciting.
Awesome. No, thank you. Thank you for that. So we know going into these next couple of years, it's not going to be easy, but it's also what a lot of us as business leaders are built for, right? How do we handle it? As what was said earlier, we either do it or we figure out how we're going to do it. I just want to thank you all, Max, Rabi, Raj, for taking the time to share your experience and insights with us, and for all you guys do to make the West Michigan business community stronger. Why don't we give them a hand?
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.